Then I'm gonna talk about libraries. This speech will be on the topic of copyright, specifically focusing on libraries and their effect on society, their role in society and what they do. The social purpose of a library as an institution is to provide the public with free, universal access to all the information and such things that they possess, all the media. And to that I would say that it's a rather noble purpose because the information and culture and such things, I do believe they do belong to the people. So the people should have access to them and the rights to use it for their purposes and such things. So libraries, of course, inherently stand against the ideas of this evil law known as copyright. Now lots of people, they might talk positively about copyright law, but lots of their arguments sort of are contradicted by the existence of libraries. So inherently, if a person supports copyright law, they kind of need to explain how libraries fit in to their worldview, because since there are those differences, a person who supports copyright either must make an exception for libraries for whatever reason, or they must just oppose libraries. Now I say that opposing libraries would just be evil, because libraries, they do good work. Their purpose in a society is important, and if anything they should be given more power. And that's what I will be talking about in this speech. In fact, I support the libraries and the principles that they stand for over those of copyright. In fact, I very much oppose copyright. Specifically, I will be talking about libraries having the right to duplicate works that they have. So, libraries, they contain lots of information and culture and all kinds of things. Specifically, I will be referring to them as works, so I'm just gonna call them that. So it's a work. Whatever specific type of media it is or what kind of information it holds is arbitrary. I'm just going to call it the work or a work. So libraries contain lots of works. Unfortunately, these works are still covered under copyright law, which means that the libraries do not have the ability to do with them whatever they want. Fortunately enough, libraries still exist despite the existence of copyright law, and they are still allowed to distribute copies to the extent that they are just lended, really. It's not really proper distribution, I guess, if the people who receive the copies don't really get them for themselves forever, but I guess that would kind of function as a form of distribution. But who cares about semantics? The important thing is that at least libraries, they are still allowed to do their thing. But I say they should be allowed to do more. I say they should be allowed to duplicate the works they have because, well, I mean, really, why not? Copyright law may make it illegal to duplicate works, but like I said, the entire existence of libraries is already kind of against copyright law to begin with. They are already an exception, and that's very arbitrary. So, since I oppose copyright law and I'm in favor of the libraries, I say, well, why shouldn't they just get more exceptions, really, if you're gonna keep the copyright law, that is. Of course, I'm in favor of just getting rid of the copyright law. It could potentially be replaced with something that's almost like copyright law, but way less bad. I've already made separate speeches about my proposal to replace copyright law if necessary, to replace it with anything at all. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be replaced with anything, there doesn't need to be anything like copyright at all. It's not inherently necessary at all. Society doesn't have to have anything remotely like copyright, inherently. But it is a compromise that can be made. So I have made a speech about my proposal for replacing copyright law, if such a system is necessary. In any case, enough of that tangent. Libraries, they already get an exception to copyright law by just existing, because they basically promote the idea of freely distributing copies to the people. People, they don't pay the author money to access those copies. And of course, person can go to the library and access the work there and never lend it, and then just go back home after visiting the library, never having lent the copy. So, the point being that the libraries, they already give free access to the works that they have. So since that's already a sort of a violation of copyright law, and it's just an exception made for libraries so that libraries can do what they do, even if copyright law exists. Well, if you're going to keep the copyright law, I am in favor of giving more such exceptions, for libraries. So, why should they be allowed to duplicate their works? Well, I mean, really, like I said, why not? After all, keep in mind what it is that the libraries do in the first place. Their goal is to give free access to the works they have to the people. So, to do this more effectively, go ahead and duplicate the works, because the more of the work they have, more copies of it, the more effectively they can serve the purpose that they have to the society, to give people free access to the works they have in the library. And it's not only to lend more copies of the same work at the same time and have more people concurrently looking at that work, but it's also to preserve the works more effectively, since, of course, physical media, whatever form that may take, whether it's a book or an optical media or a magnetic tape, whatever form of a physical media it may be, all physical media, it will degrade over time, because it's subject to the elements in a way. Now it will be always subject to some wear and tear, or whatever you want to call it. Even people just handling the works will always worsen its quality over time. There could be scratches or tears in paper or whatever, all kinds of things. But, you know, books they can burn, they can get lost. Optical media is subject to disc rot and magnetic tapes that they just wear in use and all kinds of things like that, you know. Media, it degrades. So, fundamentally, to preserve the media, the information needs to be extracted from the media and applied to another media that is more fresh. So this way the information itself can be preserved where the previous media that the information was on, even if that gets broken or destroyed or whatever, the new copy will persist. It will remain existing. So given that all the physical media it degrades, what you are really doing by not allowing the libraries to duplicate the works in order to preserve them is you're really just setting an arbitrary expiration date on all the media for when the media is no longer allowed to be accessible to the library. That's what you're doing. Even if the law itself does not state that a library must only have a work for a certain amount of time, given that that's the way the reality works, and by omitting that in the law, or rather the exception for it, the law is effectively prohibiting libraries from possessing copies of certain works for unlimited amount of time. And I don't see why that has to be. In fact, I'm opposed to that state of things, which is what I've now said several times. Libraries should have the right to duplicate the works they possess, not only for preservation, but also to just distribute them to the people more effectively. More copies means more people can get the copies, but even if you don't want to take it that far, like whatever compromises you might make, these are still two different things. These are two different things that I'm talking about, but they are both what comes of duplicating works. They are just two ways to use the duplicated works. But even the preservation argument, I think the preservation argument is the more important one here, because the preservation argument, even if the library just has the duplicated works in some archive, even if they weren't accessible to the people for some reason because some stupid copyright law gets in the way, nonsense, stupid law. Anyway, even if they just kept it in some archive, if the work that is accessible to the people on the library shelves, if that work gets damaged or lost or whatever, they could always retrieve another copy of that work from a library and then restore that work back on the bookshelf. So, you know, the function of duplicating works, it could still be done even if it doesn't actually give the library more power to actually distribute more works. So I think that's a reasonable compromise to any person who would, for some reason, support copyright law and want to take that really far. Like even a person who is just in favor of copyright law, you know, that's a reasonable kind of compromise that I don't see what would really be the issue with, unless you really just want to hurt libraries and the goal that the libraries have in a society, unless you really just want to get in the way of that, then I don't see why you would oppose libraries having the right to duplicate works so that they can preserve them. They should totally and utterly have the right to do so. That should be the default state of things. That should be what they do all the time. Yeah, but if you are, if you are opposed to libraries just existing, well, then explain their presence in the law in the first place. No, if you really just want them gone, then that's unfortunate. I think that's an evil goal to have. Because libraries, they do good. But yeah, I'm also in favor of the libraries just having the right to just lend more copies of the work. Once they have a copy of a work, they should just be allowed to make duplicates of that work and then lend out more copies. Because it doesn't really change the behavior of the library in any way, like in the sense that, the library still has the same exception that it has. The library is still just lending out copies, just like it has before. Nothing has really changed in that sense. It's just that more people can now lend the same book at the same time. Is that really a meaningful change that would bother someone who supports copyright law or whatever any more than the exception they already have? Libraries, they already contradict the worldview of a copyright law supporter. So, why shouldn't the libraries just have more exceptions? Since the exceptions don't really change much from the point of view of the person who supports copyright law, but they do still change things in a meaningful enough way that I'm in support of those sorts of exceptions being granted to libraries, or just outright getting rid of copyright law. That would do it. So yeah, I don't see why any reasonable person would really oppose what I'm saying here. Unless your goal really is just to hurt society for the sake of itself. You just want to oppose the idea of the libraries just because you disagree with the principles. Unless that's the case, then I don't see why anyone would oppose the argument I'm making. Because libraries, they already lend out copies. They already have copies and the people can access them freely. So yeah, allow libraries to make more copies of the works. At least for preservation. Because there shouldn't be any arbitrary expiration date for how long a library is allowed to have a copy of the work. That's just promoting lost media if you don't allow libraries to duplicate works. Lost media is really unfortunate. It's very sad when media gets lost, and that's the kind of thing you promote with copyright law in general. But especially with libraries, it's a tragedy, because libraries, they have this noble goal in a society to give the free access to all the information works that they have. So yeah, it's very unfortunate if the works get lost or destroyed, potentially forever. There could be some really old, obscure works that only the library could potentially have, or just few copies in the world and such things. Those sorts of endangered works, if they can be called that. Not only should those be allowed to be copied, but there's really no reason not to allow copying of any works. But it kind of is just rather silly that the copyright law exists in the first place, and the whole premise of it is really kind of just stupid. And as long as libraries exist, it's always going to be like the principles that library has kind of laughing at copyright law for making such a silly way to look at the world. The worldview of the copyright system, it's so ridiculous, because the libraries, they could just as well make the copies. There are the technical capabilities, the capacity to make duplicate copies of works. But the only reason libraries don't do that is because of arbitrary limitations. Just some law somewhere that says that, you aren't allowed to do this. That's stupid. It could be done. There's a reason to do it. It would be a good thing to do it. And yet it can't be done because some law somewhere says that it can't be done. It's stupid. Copyright law, it's just a bad thing. It's basically universally bad. Now, I have explained in previous speeches that there may be some potential benefits that a copyright law, to some extent, may have. It may be seen as a compromise. It could have some benefits, some aspects that are positive. that it results in, some positive qualities to it. However, the copyright law would need to be implemented in a very specific way for that to be achieved. And it should not last too long, it should not restrict too many activities like it does. So the copyright law as it exists right now everywhere in the world, it's way too restrictive and it's way too lasting, because copyright just lasts too long. Yeah, copyright is just bad, it's just bad. Everything is bad because of copyright. Yeah, everything bad comes from copyright. Copyright is the root cause of all these bad things. Like, if you think about a work that a library has, if they have a copy of some work, and then that work gets damaged, broken, whatever, lost, who knows, then that copy is just gone. The library doesn't have it anymore. Why should the library be denied that work just because some unfortunate events that played out that got that work destroyed? Why? If the library is allowed to lend that work to the people, then the library should just be allowed to lend that work to the people, not that specific copy of the work. So even if that specific copy gets destroyed, the library should still have the legal right to distribute that work, regardless of what copy of the work it is. And that should just be the way things are. If they are not that way, then there's a big problem. If they are that way, then that's good. So yeah, that's just something to think about. Yeah, copyright law really sucks. Big time. It's really bad. It's really unfortunate. Because it's just so bad. It's so miserable. Because it's so stupid, it's so arbitrary. It doesn't even get done what it tries to do or whatever. Because think about it really. A person who doesn't want to pay for a work, they're not gonna pay regardless of whether copyright law exists or not. Whether you try to deny them access to the work, you may or may not succeed, but you are certainly not gonna get them to pay for the work. I can't see that being the case. I just can't see that being the case. If a person doesn't want to pay for a work, then they're just not gonna pay for the work. Tough luck, what are you gonna do about it? If a person does something with the work that's illegal, they're just gonna do it. So they haven't stopped illegal distribution of works, even if copyright law exists. So what difference does it make then, whether copyright law exists or not, really? All it does, when it exists, is just cause a bunch of harm, because it restricts so many good uses for works that are out there. And it does indeed deny people the right to legally share works. And it does mean that there will be a lot less sharing done, and there will be unfortunate punishments for those who do good work and share. Yeah, and also, if a person goes to a library, and only to a library, that person could be very cultured, a very cultured individual who has read a lot of books and knows all the things about everything and all that stuff, all the books ever made that are in a library, they could have read all that stuff. And they would have never paid for any of those books because they read them all in a library. So it's possible that a person can experience all those works and learn from them and all that stuff, even with copyright law existing legally. So then what point is there in the copyright law in the first place? Because a person can just go to a library. The library is this big exception that really doesn't make any sense. If you have copyright law, explain libraries. How do you explain that? I don't recall ever having heard any person who supports copyright law explain the premise of libraries and how that fits in. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. It's a contradiction. It's a conflict. The two are only mutually existing at this time because of exceptions. There are just some exceptions. Because libraries, they have, fortunately, enough of a cultural presence, the institution of a library, it has enough of a presence in a society already, an established presence, so fortunately they weren't eradicated. But it really is just an exception. It doesn't make any sense. I can't see how a person who fundamentally believes in the inherent right that a copyright law as a legal right promotes, how that person would like talking about libraries. Like, yeah, no. Yeah, that person probably dislikes libraries. And that's a very unfortunate thing. No, isn't it? Yeah, that's just a stark contrast in people's values. Because I've heard about these people, because I've heard of them, heard from them. People who just believe in the inherent right, that they don't see copyright laws being this legal compromise, this system. They just believe in the copyright laws, this inherent value, this right. Just an inherent right. Not as a legal compromise, but an inherent right. And like, what a sad worldview. What a corrupt moral compass. Yeah, those are some bad ethics. That's really bad. Yeah, like that sucks. Yeah, those are some bad people. Evil. Or they support evil, whatever. Is a person evil if they promote evil? Even if they think they are good? Well, I say they are. Anyway, let's not get on sidetracks. Yeah. Explain libraries. Like, they don't make any sense. A person who supports copyright law, you really need to make an argument for how libraries fit in. Or you just have to say that you oppose libraries. Yeah. One of which is bad and the other one doesn't make any sense. The one that doesn't make any sense is the one where libraries exist, because it doesn't make any sense. You know, if you're really just gonna support copyright law as an inherent right, you need to oppose libraries to have consistency in your worldview. Otherwise you have inconsistencies, you are a hypocrite or whatever. It's not a consistent worldview. So yeah, it's nonsense, yeah. But if you see copyright as being like a compromise, then yeah, sure, I guess there could be some exception, but you need to make that argument, you need to explain it. Why is there an exception for libraries? And I used the example of some, quote, cultured person, unquote, who has read all the books in the library, but it really doesn't need to be that. Like, you know, anyone can go to the library and see any number of works, and the library can give access to any number of people to any number of works. It kind of doesn't have any limit. It's limited by only the amount of people who want to go to the library. So a person who doesn't want to pay for a work can go to a library and access that work there. Explain that if you believe in copyright law. Like, if that's your faith, if that's what you believe is right, morally right. Because there is a distinction between legally right and morally right, of course. Anyone who doesn't see that is just a clown. So yeah, but it's still worth mentioning, because I'm using the same word, right. Right. So, yeah, libraries. Good stuff. Libraries do good, yeah. Support libraries. They should be given more power, you know. Every library should have like this massive archive that they have like somewhere, like some back rooms full of archived copies and like just lots of duplicate works too. Like, yeah, that's a cool idea. Like, that's how it should be. Like, there should be just so many works too. And libraries, they should just be allowed to like gather lots of stuff, like just infinite amount of stuff, and like just provide it to people, because that's what's good. Yeah, only limited by the physical space they have to store that stuff. Yeah. And who says that it has to be limited to physical media like books or whatever? You could just as well store information on hard drives, computer hard drives. You could have shelves and shelves of hard drives storing all the works, and you could have like this massive tertiary storage machine, like where like there's this mechanical arm that moves around and like accesses all the stuff like they do in like some archives, and like that sort of things would like it would have everything. And you know, like, since those things exist, and like you know, that's what's good, and like that's the good stuff, that's what's good. So more of that, right? And how do you explain that if you believe in copyright law? You really can't. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. You kind of have to pick one or the other, and I pick libraries. Libraries are cool. Yeah. 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 The principles of libraries, they really should just cover more of society too. Because that's what it really is when one opposes copyright law. It really is just applying the principles that libraries stand for to the rest of society, really. Why should copyright law exist at all? It's evil, it gets in the way of what's good. The principles that the libraries stand for, those are what's good. So yeah, libraries having the right to duplicate the works they have, they would just have infinite copies, basically, available, because they can copy as many of the works as they want, and have as many of the copies as they want, and all that stuff. So yeah, lots of efficient use of space with the hard drives, because a hard drive can store lots of books. You know, the physical amount of space that a physical book takes is way more than what a hard drive storing the same amount of information in text, in numbers, like binary. And it could be also losslessly compressed too. So yeah, the information density of like hard drives is way more. And we have the technology for this. Like you can really just copy paste information on hard drives with computers. Like you can just do it. You can duplicate, mirror, clone hard drives. That's the correct word, clone. Mirroring is when you have multiple hard drives running in parallel on a computer and they are mirrored. Anyway, cloning hard drives, you could just do that and like you would just have shelves and shelves of duplicated works and like, you know, like some real archival stuff. Yeah, why not? Allocate some more resources to libraries, why not? Like that's what's good. Put more resources into that. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, how come every library doesn't have a massive warehouse where this tertiary storage mechanical machine arm goes around retrieving the hard drives, and there's like a bunch of duplicates of the hard drives too. You could have some redundancy systems too. It doesn't like, it's not even just duplicates that you need. You could just as well have redundancy. You could have some RAID set file system running there with hundreds and hundreds of hard drives running in parallel. Wouldn't that just be awesome? Yeah. Like you could have that as the cache system, and then you could have a separate system for the more of a cold storage in the tertiary storage system. Yeah, that would be neat. So yeah, how come every library doesn't do that? And they would just have all the copies that they could ever have. And they could just provide that. And you know, while on the topic of this, why shouldn't the libraries just give access to those things over the network, the internet? Anyone could just access the internet, access the library through the internet, and access all those works. You know, why bother physically going to the library when one could just connect to the library across the network? We have the technology for this. The internet exists. Why are we not using it? Now, there are some libraries that do provide things on the internet. But like, I'm not just talking about like a few people doing few things, but like, no. Like, that should just be prevalent. It should be like this really big thing. But it's not a big thing. Unfortunately, there are some libraries that do that sort of thing, and that's good. That's good. And all the power to them. But it should be done more power to them, more resources allocated. More funding, more rights legally. All that sort of stuff. Because libraries are what's good. So yeah, why bother physically going to the library? Access the copies across the network. And of course, let's get rid of copyright law. So, why bother ever returning the copy when digital information can be just infinitely copied? One can copy-paste information and the original copy isn't lost. So anyone can take a copy from the library and there's no need to return it back there. They would still retain the original copy. And then an infinite amount of people can go to the library over the network and then just retrieve infinite amounts of copies from there. Everyone can access everything and keep all the copies permanently. Like, wouldn't that just be so awesome? That's the correct way to get things done. And how different is that from what libraries already do? In terms of, like, what they actually do, like, fundamentally, other than in scale. The only difference really is just the scale. Because right now it takes physically going there, and only one person at a time, and only lending it for this amount of time. Arbitrary restrictions. We have the technology to get rid of all of those limitations. They are so arbitrary. And that's the problem. That's what this is about. Because it's so arbitrary. It's pointless. We have the technology. In the world that we live in, the technology exists. We can do all the computer systems. We can have the computers copy-paste information and share it across the network. How is that any different from what libraries already do, other than in scale? So why are there arbitrary limitations in the scale that the libraries are allowed to operate in? How ridiculous is that? Because I believe what the libraries do is good. The role they have in a society, it's just universally good. So why are we holding back on something that's good? It's stupid. That's what forces of evil do in a society. They trample on what's good. They put restrictions and limitations on what's good. And they promote evil. So yeah. Get rid of such stupid things like copyright law. Allow libraries to increase the scale. Massively. Yeah. Why lend a copy for a short amount of time? Even just increasing that. Like even if you were to have some stupid arbitrary limitation, it still doesn't need to be so short. Like if you retrieved a copy from the library across the network, why should you return it so quickly? And if more people can lend copies at the same time, they could all return them back. There could be some DRM, of course I think that's evil, but like technically it's possible. I wouldn't be in favor of that, but it's technically possible. So like, they are arbitrary, that's my point. That it's arbitrary. But I'm in favor of just allowing everyone to do everything. Have no stupid restriction at all. Me pointing out that there are technical ways to even apply compromises to the system I'm describing is just to illustrate the point that it's so arbitrary. We have the technology to do anything. And we are doing basically nothing with it. Yeah, I don't see every library everywhere having all these computer systems serving infinite amounts of information for everyone. I don't see that being the case. Why is that so? We can do it, we have the capacity to do so. And yet it's not being done. It's unfortunate. Yeah. Infinite copies. Infinite copies for everyone. That's what libraries already do. Just on a way smaller scale. So, if you make an exception for libraries, why not just make that exception bigger? Think about it. Anyway, that's that for this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.